For 28 years, I chased a ghost. A woman named Mary Fisher who, on a humid summer evening in 1996, walked out of her Richmond, Virginia apartment and simply ceased to exist. Her car was still in its spot, her wallet was on the kitchen counter next to a half-finished glass of iced tea, and the TV was left on, casting a silent, flickering glow on the empty living room. In all my years as a detective, I've seen a lot of strange things, but the Mary Fisher case was different. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was an erasure. It was as if the universe had just plucked her out of existence. The file, yellowed and worn, sat on the corner of my desk for years, a constant, quiet reminder of my biggest failure. But what if I told you the ghost I was chasing, the woman who haunted my career, was never really gone? What if she was hiding in plain sight, living a quiet life under a different name? A name that belonged to another ghost. Welcome to Detected Cold Cases, your daily dive into the world of unsolved mysteries, forgotten crimes, and chilling cases that still haunt investigators. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new revelation. My name is Frank Miller. I'm retired now, but for 35 years, I was a detective with the Richmond Police Department. The Fisher case landed on my desk when I was just a few years out of my probationary period. I was young, ambitious, and I thought I could solve anything. Mary's disappearance humbled me. She was 26 years old, a librarian at the city's main branch. She was described by everyone as quiet, dependable, and sweet. The kind of person who returns her shopping cart and always has a kind word for the cashier. She had no known enemies, no secret gambling debts, no turbulent love affairs. Her life was an open book, and on July 14, 1996, someone had slammed that book shut. We interviewed everyone. Her parents, Robert and Carol Fisher, were devastated. They were a simple, church-going couple from the suburbs who couldn't fathom what had happened. They sat in the sterile interview room, their hands clasped together, their faces etched with a pain so deep it was hard to look at. Carol, Mary's mother, kept repeating the same thing over and over. She would never just leave. Not without a word. Not Mary. Her words were punctuated by a grief that felt older, more profound than just this one event. And it was. You see, the Fisher family had already been touched by this kind of tragedy. 8 years earlier, in 1988, their other daughter, Jennifer, had vanished. Jennifer was the opposite of Mary. She was 18, rebellious, and ran with a rough crowd. One night, after a massive fight with her father about her boyfriend, she packed a bag and left. She was never seen or heard from again. The police at the time wrote it off as a teenage runaway. They figured she'd turn up eventually when the money ran out. She never did. The case went cold almost as soon as it opened. So when Mary disappeared, it was like a wound that had never healed was ripped open again. 2 daughters, gone without a trace. It was a parent's worst nightmare, doubled. We looked at Jennifer's case, of course. We wondered if there was a connection. Maybe the same person was responsible. But the circumstances were so different. Jennifer's disappearance had a narrative, a reason, however flimsy. She ran away. Mary's disappearance had nothing. It was a vacuum. There was no note, no sign of a struggle, no witnesses. Her bank accounts were untouched. Her last paycheck was never cashed. She just stopped. We chased down every lead. We dragged rivers. We brought in cadaver dogs. We put her face on billboards and the back of milk cartons. For months, the city was plastered with Mary's gentle, smiling face. Her dark, kind eyes seemed to follow you everywhere, asking a question nobody could answer. Where did I go? The calls came in, as they always do. Sightings in Florida, in California, in a diner in rural Ohio. Everyone was a dead end. A woman who looked a little like her, but wasn't. The hope that flared with each call was extinguished just as quickly, leaving us deeper in the dark. The parents, Robert and Carol, were my shadows for that first year. They'd call me every day. Any news, detective? Have you found anything, Frank? At first, I had things to tell them. We're checking this, we're following up on that. But after a while, the updates dwindled. The leads dried up. The case went from being on the front page to a small column on page 12, and then it disappeared from the papers altogether. But it never disappeared from my mind. I'd be at home, trying to have dinner with my wife, and I'd see Mary's face. I'd be watching my own kids play in the yard, and I'd think of the 2 empty chairs at the Fishers' dinner table. Years went by. I got promoted. I solved other cases, put other bad guys away. Life moved on for everyone, except, I imagine, for the Fishers. Robert passed away from a heart attack in 2005. Carol moved into a nursing home a few years later, her memory starting to fade, perhaps as a mercy from a mind that had endured too much. The Mary Fisher file was officially boxed up and moved to the cold case archives in the basement, a tomb of forgotten stories and unanswered questions. Every now and then, on a slow day, I'd go down there. The air was always cool and smelled of dust and old paper. I'd pull out the box, run my fingers over the faded label, Fisher Mary. I'd open it and look at the photos, the reports, the map of the search grids. It felt like visiting a grave. And then last year, things changed. I was 3 months from retirement. I was cleaning out my old desk, packing up 35 years of my life into cardboard boxes, when I found it. Tucked away in the back of a drawer was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It was my original notebook from the Fisher case in '96. I'd thought it was in the official file. I sat down and started flipping through the pages, my own spidery handwriting taking me back in time. It was all there, interview notes, license plate numbers, timelines. And then I saw a note I'd completely forgotten I'd made. It was from an interview with one of Jennifer Fisher's old high school friends, a girl named Brenda. I had talked to her in '96, trying to find any link between the 2 sisters. Most of what she said was about Jennifer's rebellious phase, her drug use, her volatile boyfriend. But there was one line I'd underlined. Jennifer always said she had a plan, an escape plan. She had a place she could go where no one would ever find her. She even had a new name picked out. At the time, it seemed irrelevant. It was about Jennifer, the runaway, not Mary, the mystery. But now, reading it decades later, a strange thought sparked in my mind. What if Mary knew about the plan? It was a long shot, a crazy idea born from the desperation of a retiring cop who couldn't let his biggest failure go. But it was something. For the first time in over 2 decades, I had a thread, however thin. The world was a different place in 2024 than it was in 1996. We had technology they could only dream of back then. Facial recognition, nationwide databases that could be searched in seconds, social media. The old ways of disappearing were gone. If Mary Fisher was alive, if she had used her sister's escape plan, there had to be a digital footprint somewhere. I didn't tell my captain what I was doing. He would have told me to focus on packing my boxes and picking out a fishing rod. This was off the books. My own time. My own obsession. I started with the name. Brenda, the friend. Couldn't remember the new name Jennifer had picked out. So that was a dead end. I went back to the original file, to the box from the basement. I laid out every single piece of paper, every photograph, on a large table in an empty conference room. I was looking for something I had missed, a detail so small it had been invisible for 28 years. I spent a week in that room, fueled by stale coffee and a sense of finality. I read every word of every report. I stared at the crime scene photos of Mary's apartment until the floral pattern on her sofa was burned into my brain. I looked at photos of Mary, photos of Jennifer, photos of the 2 of them together as little girls. And that's when I saw it. It was a picture of the 2 sisters, taken at a family barbecue a year or so before Jennifer ran away. They were standing side by side, arms around each other. Mary was smiling her gentle, quiet smile. Jennifer had a mischievous grin, and around Jennifer's neck was a silver necklace. It was a nameplate necklace, the kind that was popular back in the '80s. The photo wasn't high resolution, just a standard snapshot, but if you looked closely, you could just make out the name. It wasn't Jennifer. The first letter looked like AJ, the last one an E. It was almost nothing, a blurry name on a necklace in a 30-year-old photo. But my heart started pounding. I took the photo to our digital forensics lab. I have a friend there, a young guy named Kevin who can work miracles with pixels. I told him I needed him to enhance the necklace, to make the name legible. He looked at the grainy photo and then at me like I was crazy. "Frank, this thing was probably taken with a disposable camera. There's not much to work with here." "Just try, Kevin," I said. "It's important." He worked on it for 2 days. On the third day, he called me. "You're not going to believe this," he said. He sent me the enhanced image. The name was clear as day, spelled out in looping silver script. Jane. Jane. It wasn't a common name, but it wasn't unique either. A Jane Doe is what we call an unidentified body. The irony wasn't lost on me. But now I had something to search for. I ran the name Jane Fisher through every database I could think of. Nothing. But then I had another thought. If you're creating a new identity, you don't keep your old last name. You might change it completely. What was Jennifer's, or Jane's, mother's maiden name? I dug back into the file. Carol Fisher's maiden name was Miller. Same as mine. A strange coincidence. I ran a search for Jane Miller. The system exploded with results. Thousands of them all over the country. It was an impossible task. But then I narrowed the search. I used an approximate age, based on what Mary's age would be today, 54. The list got shorter, but it was still hundreds of names long. I needed another piece of data, something to connect this hypothetical Jane Miller to Mary Fisher. What did I know about Mary? She was a librarian. She loved books. She was quiet, kept to herself. On a hunch, I started cross-referencing the names on my list with professional licenses. Was there a Jane Miller who was a librarian, a teacher, a bookstore owner? I spent days going through the results, state by state. My eyes were burning from staring at the screen. My retirement was a week away. I was about to give up. I figured I'd go out with this one last failure, a fitting end to the case that had defined my career. And then I found her, Jane Miller, age 54, living in a small, quiet town in Oregon called Silver Creek. It was a picturesque little place nestled in the mountains, the kind of town people move to when they want to disappear. And her occupation? She owned a small bookstore on the town's main street. It was called The Next Chapter. My hands were shaking. It was too perfect. The age, the occupation, the name of the bookstore, it was all a little too on the nose. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be, but I couldn't let it go. I pulled up the public records for this Jane Miller. She had a driver's license. I clicked on the image. A woman with short, graying brown hair and kind, dark eyes stared back at me from the screen. She was older, with fine lines around her eyes and mouth, but there was no mistaking that face. It was Mary Fisher. I flew to Oregon the next day. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. This was something I had to do myself. As the plane descended into Portland, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. What was I going to say to her? After 28 years, what do you say to a ghost? The drive to Silver Creek was beautiful. Tall pine trees lined the highway, and the air was crisp and clean. It was a world away from the humid summers of Richmond. Silver Creek was exactly what I expected. A charming main street with antique shops, a bakery, and a small, independent bookstore with a dark green awning that read The Next Chapter. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. I saw her through the large front window. She was arranging books on a table, her movements calm and practiced. She looked happy, content. Customers would come in, and she'd greet them with a warm smile. She was a part of this community. She had built a life here, a whole new existence. Who was I to come and tear it all down? For a moment, I thought about getting back in my car and driving away. I could leave her be. Let the secret die with me. No one else knew. But I thought of her parents, of the years of pain they endured. I thought of the promise I had made to them all those years ago, to find their daughter. I took a deep breath and walked across the street. A small bell chimed as I opened the door. The shop smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. Mary, or Jane, looked up from behind the counter. Her smile was welcoming. "Can I help you find anything?" she asked, her voice soft. I just stood there for a second, my heart pounding in my chest. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times, but now that it was here, I had no words. I just looked at her, at the face I had only seen in faded photographs for nearly 3 decades. The recognition dawned on her slowly. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her face. She knew who I was. Maybe she didn't know my name, but she knew what I represented. She knew I was the past walking through her door. "Mary," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She shook her head. "You must have me confused with someone else," she said. Her voice strained. "My name is Jane. Jane Miller." I slowly pulled a photograph out of my jacket pocket. It was her old library ID from Richmond. The smiling, 26-year-old face of Mary Fisher. I placed it on the counter between us. She stared at it, her composure finally crumbling. Her eyes filled with tears. She leaned against the counter, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The bookstore was empty except for us. The silence was deafening, filled with 28 years of unspoken words. "How?" she finally whispered, not looking at me, but at the face of the young woman she used to be. "A lot of years and a little bit of luck," I said gently. "I'm Detective Miller, Richmond PD. I was the lead on your case back in '96. She finally looked up at me, her eyes swimming with a mix of fear, resignation, and something else, relief. "They're gone, aren't they?" she asked. "My parents." "Your father passed in 2005, I said. "Your mother is in a nursing home. Her memory isn't what it used to be." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. For a long time, she just stood there, crying silently. I let her. What else could I do? Finally, she took a shaky breath and seemed to steel herself. She walked around the counter, flipped the sign on the door from open to closed, and locked it. "You'd better come in the back," she said. "I'll make some tea. I suppose I owe you an explanation." We sat in a small, cluttered office behind the main shop. She told me everything. The story that came pouring out of her was more complicated and tragic than I could have ever imagined. It all went back to Jennifer. Jennifer hadn't just run away from home because of a fight with her father. She was running for her life. Her boyfriend, a man named Rick, was more than just a bad influence. He was a small-time drug dealer who was getting involved with some very dangerous people. He was also abusive, controlling, and violent. Jennifer was terrified of him. She had come to Mary a few weeks before she disappeared in 1988. She had a black eye and a split lip that she tried to hide with makeup. She told Mary that Rick was in deep with a local gang and that he was trying to force her to be a mule, to carry drugs for him. If she refused, he said he would kill her. She was trapped. So the two sisters, in the quiet of Mary's small apartment, came up with a plan. The runaway story was a cover. Mary helped Jennifer pack a bag, gave her all the money she had saved, and drove her to a bus station in the middle of the night. Jennifer was going to use the name Jane, a name they'd picked from a novel they both loved. She was going to start over somewhere new, somewhere Rick could never find her. They promised to stay in touch through coded letters sent to a P.O. box Mary rented. For a few years, the plan worked. Mary would get a letter every few months. Jennifer was in Arizona, then California. She was working as a waitress. She was okay. But then, the letters stopped. Mary tried writing, but her letters were returned, stamped addressee unknown. She was frantic. She wanted to go to the police, but what could she say? She had helped her sister, a known runaway, disappear. They wouldn't take her seriously. She feared the worst, that Rick had somehow found her. Years passed. Mary tried to move on, but the fear and guilt were always there, a shadow in the back of her mind. She finished her degree, became a librarian. She lived a quiet, careful life. And then Rick came back. He had been in and out of jail over the years, but now he was out for good. He was bigger, meaner, and still connected to dangerous people. He showed up at the library one day. He cornered Mary in the stacks. He said he knew that she had helped Jennifer disappear all those years ago. He said Jennifer had stolen money from him before she left, and now he wanted it back, with interest. He told Mary that if she didn't pay him, What happened to Jennifer would happen to her. He was vague, but the threat was clear. He had found Jennifer. He had hurt her. And now he was coming for Mary. She was terrified. She went to the police, but with no proof, just the word of a quiet librarian against a hardened ex-con. There was nothing they could do. They told her to get a restraining order. She knew that would be useless. Rick would see it as a declaration of war. He would kill her. She felt like she had no choice. She was trapped, just like Jennifer had been. So, she decided to use the same plan. She would disappear. But this time, she would become the ghost her sister had left behind. She would become Jennifer. It was a strange, twisted kind of logic. She reasoned that Rick was looking for Mary Fisher. He would never think to look for her sister, the girl who had vanished 8 years prior. The police had written Jennifer off as a runaway. Her case file was buried and forgotten. So Mary took her sister's name and her sister's story. She emptied a secret savings account she had, packed a single bag with fake identification she had bought, and walked away from her life. She took a bus, then another, and another, making her way across the country, just like Jennifer had. She ended up in Oregon, in the small town of Silver Creek, where no one knew her. She introduced herself as Jennifer Miller, using her mother's maiden name, a woman who had run away from a troubled past and was looking for a quiet place to start over. The town embraced her. They saw a woman looking for peace, and they gave it to her. Over the years, she saved up enough money to buy the bookstore. Mary Fisher, the librarian, died, and Jennifer Miller, the bookstore owner, was born. As she finished her story, the tears were streaming down her face. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she sobbed. "Especially not my parents. But I didn't know what else to do. I was so scared. I just wanted to live." I sat there, the cold cup of tea in my hands, trying to process it all. 28 years of mystery, of questions, of dead ends, all explained in a little back room in a bookstore in Oregon. My ghost had a story, and it was a story of survival. But it was also a story of a crime. She had faked her own disappearance, created a false identity, and lived a lie for nearly 3 decades. As a cop, my duty was clear. But as a man who had been haunted by this case for most of his adult life, I felt a profound sense of pity for this woman. She had been living in a prison of her own making, constantly looking over her shoulder, mourning her family and the life she had lost. What happened to the real Jennifer? I asked quietly. She shook her head, a fresh wave of grief washing over her. "I don't know. I've spent my whole life wondering. I think he killed her, Detective. I think Rick killed my sister, and he was going to kill me too." The arrest was the strangest one I ever made. There were no sirens, no flashing lights. I called the local sheriff, a kind, older man named Bill. I explained the situation to him. He was shocked. He knew Jennifer Miller. She was a respected member of his community. She volunteered at the local school. She organized the town's annual book drive. He couldn't believe it. When we went back to the bookstore, she was waiting. She had her bag packed. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She just looked tired. As the sheriff put the handcuffs on her, she turned to me. "Thank you, Detective," she said. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For finding me," she whispered. "I'm so tired of running." The news of the arrest sent shockwaves through Silver Creek. Her friends, her customers, the people who thought they knew her, were in disbelief. The story was a national sensation. Missing librarian found alive after 28 years, living as missing sister. It was the kind of headline that sounds like fiction, but it was real. Mary, and she was Mary again, now was extradited back to Virginia. She faced charges of identity fraud and obstructing justice. But her story changed everything. Her testimony about Rick finally gave us what we needed. We opened a new investigation, a murder investigation, into the disappearance of the real Jennifer Fisher. We found Rick living in Florida, a fat, balding man in his 50s who thought he had gotten away with it. Faced with Mary's testimony and new evidence we were able to dig up, he confessed. He had found Jennifer in Arizona back in 1990. They had argued about the money. He had killed her in a fit of rage and buried her body in the desert. He was sentenced to life in prison. Mary, for her part, received a lenient sentence. Given the circumstances, the judge gave her probation. She had lost everything: her family, her identity, her life. But in a strange way, she had finally found her freedom. She was no longer running. She no longer had to live in fear. I retired a week after I got back from Oregon. My last official act was to close the Mary Fisher case file. I wrote the final entry in the report, detailing the long, strange journey from a quiet apartment in Richmond to a charming bookstore 3,000 miles away. After 28 years, my ghost was at peace. And so was I. Stories like this, they make you question everything you think you know about people. How well can you ever truly know someone? What secrets are they hiding behind a friendly smile? Mary Fisher lived a lie for 28 years, but was she a criminal or was she a survivor? How far would you go to save your own life? These are the questions that don't have easy answers. The world is full of secrets buried in the past, hiding in plain sight. If you're fascinated by the mysteries that lie just beneath the surface of our everyday lives, and you want to hear more stories about the secrets that time tried to bury, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Because you never know whose ghost we're going to find next.